Good day, everyone. Welcome to our lecture on Socrates and the early social contract theory. So in this lecture, we will discuss the dialogue Crito and the early social contract theory according to Socrates. So the dialogue describes Crito as he arrives at the crack of dawn and finds Socrates still in his comfortable slumber. Though he decides not to wake the philosopher from his peace, Crito is visibly distressed by the news that the state galley that was to signal Socrates' death had already been sighted yesterday at Sunion. This means that the sacred ship will arrive at Piraeus that very day, and tomorrow will be the day of Socrates' execution. In his troubled state, Crito thinks that he must convince Socrates to escape from the prison and from what he and even Socrates could perceive as an unjust judgment. So in the opening scene, Plato describes Socrates' prison as a room in the state prison of Athens, small, almost dark, except for the light of a small lamp, and with the fewest of comforts. These conditions are not alien to this intellectual gadfly, who is not only described as poor, but also ugly, shoeless, sleeping in doorways, and spending his whole life in philosophizing. So the question posed to us by the dialogue is this: should Socrates escape or not? And an alternative issue: it is just for Socrates to allow himself to be executed. A conventional reading of Plato's Crito and the other dialogues that describe the last days of Socrates would immediately make clear to us the fact that it was Socrates himself who decided against escaping, and he has valid and convincing reasons not to do it. For Socrates, the central motivation in this rational and courageous act was the issue of justice, of which he was the most passionate incarnation. Socrates did not escape because doing such a thing was simply against justice. He would be seen as unjust if he tried to escape from prison. So let's hear what are the arguments for escape given by Crito. First, Crito feels that Socrates' execution is not right or just. Socrates is just doing what his enemies want him to do. Second, Socrates will betray his sons, for he will not be able to educate and take care of them. Third, Socrates will be seen as cowardly when he could have acted justly by being courageous. Fourth, there is also Crito and his friends' selfish motive. They are concerned about their own image of power and influence. If Socrates dies, they would be seen as cowards, impotent and useless to prevent their friend's death. Most people would think that Crito was unwilling to spend money for Socrates' escape, when in fact it was Socrates who refuses to escape. So connected with the above is the fifth reason, wherein Crito explains the great sadness and suffering he would experience if Socrates was to die. The main point of these arguments is to show that Socrates' execution is not only bad or unjust, it would also be morally shameful, both for him and his friends. But Socrates had his counter-arguments. And first among the arguments to be destroyed is the popular argument of what people will think or say, or what we may call the argument from the many. For Socrates, a certain objectivity about the truth of things is vital for the determination of the most rational and therefore right or just or ethical course of action. Hence, for him, the opinion of the majority is not a competent and certain guide for action. Often, these majority opinions lead one to harm rather than the good. So even though it may be objected that the majority has the power to put one to death, Socrates continues that his argument is quite unaffected by it. Since the argument in favor of escaping does not hold, Socrates must therefore not escape. By such intellectual maneuver, Socrates has brought the burden of the matter from the issue of death, that is the logical result of the act of not escaping, to the question of the good life. For Socrates, escape, death, and even life ultimately has relative value. For the really important thing is not to live, but to live well. And this implies that one live honorably or rightly. The absolute value is to live life well in the here and now. From such negative destruction of Crito's reasoning, Socrates then grounds his decision not to escape on a more fundamental ethical principle, that is, the principle that one must never willingly do wrong under any circumstances. The absoluteness of this ethical command is such that Socrates even extends this even to what many people think as an exception to the rule, that is, returning injustice in those cases where there is evident injustice. In such cases, retaliation or retribution is generally thought to be morally permissible by most people and regard it as the natural course of action. For Socrates, this moral injunction strengthens his case in his decision not to escape. It is never right to do a wrong or to return a wrong or to defend oneself from injury by retaliation. If Socrates escapes, then he is returning injustice to the state, and this would make him unjust. It is therefore not just for him to escape from prison. He still further solidifies the foundation for his decision by looking at escape as a violation of the implicit agreement between him as an individual citizen and the state and its laws who took him under their care. In this case, Socrates must resort to the principle that one ought to fulfill all one's agreements, provided that they are right or just. So we have here two ethical principles. To sum up Socrates' argument, we can say that it is unjust for him to escape because doing so would first return injustice for the act of injustice which the state has done to him, and second, he would not be abiding by his just agreement with the state, in which case he will become unjust. Corollary to this position would be the idea that the just thing for Socrates to do is not to escape from prison, because first, he must never return injustice for any wrong done to him, and second, he must honor his just agreement with the state. As a consequence, he must stay in prison as an act of justice, a recognition that the legal system can still become the place or the space of true justice. However, such justice within the legal system is not self-contained, but more importantly points towards a greater and fuller expression of justice in the soul of the individual. So for Socrates, there would be anarchy if he would not follow the state and its laws. And he would say, the laws saying to Socrates, "Now Socrates, what are you proposing to do? Can you deny that by this act you are contemplating you intended, so far as you have the power to destroy us, the laws and the whole state as well? Do you imagine that the city can continue to exist and not be turned upside down if the legal judgments which are pronounced in it have no force but are nullified and destroyed by private persons?" So, in this moral argument, the destruction of law and order is equivalent to the destruction of society. This will be effected by Socrates if he escapes. So at this point, we come now to the description of the social contract. Socrates claims that there is an implicit agreement between him as an individual citizen and the state and its laws who took him under their care. Due this, Socrates exhorts everyone to follow the principle that one ought to fulfill all of one's agreements provided that they are right or just. It is in this context that Socrates takes the problem of escape. One must not escape because it will violate the original, though implicit agreement between him and the state. And this implies that social and political living must be underlined by the ethical. So we can see here that ethics is actually for politics. The ethical life is geared towards the enhancement of politics and social life. But the ethical is the supreme value. It must permeate all our actions. Only the ethical or just man can properly be political, or at least should engage in politics. So, citizens must therefore honor the social contract. This is an absolute command. Socrates insisted on the respect for the absolute character of the laws that must be obeyed at all costs. He claims that one should do so not only out of the gratitude for the life that the state gives to its citizens, like what children naturally have for their parents, but even in cases when one is called to die for the laws. And here we understand law as an ordinance of reason promulgated by competent authority for the achievement of the common good. So by emphasizing this absolute obedience to the law, Socrates is presenting the way towards becoming a good citizen, that is, a citizen that conforms to the laws imposed in accordance with Athenian democracy. And by presenting himself as the model of such citizen, Socrates exhorts his fellow Athenians to give to the laws the respect due to it. Ultimately, then, we can see that the justice behind Socrates' decision to allow himself to be executed lies not in the expedient justice of the Athenian law, to which Crito's conception of justice is identified, but with a justice that is concerned with the perfection of the soul. Such justice does not demand absolute obedience to the laws or to the legal system, for this kind of obedience can be external and might lead to a legalistic morality, but rather a justice that demands the radical commitment of a person faced with the most pressing question of life, that is the good life vis-a-vis death. Such justice, of course, would conflict with the traditional and conventional view of what a good and noble person is. In the case of Socrates, it was just for him to accept the penalty of death, not because he wishes to reconcile with the laws, with Athens, or with her citizens, or because he relied on the justice of the state, but because it was a consequence of his life's philosophic mission, that is, to call men to the pursuit of the most important things and lead their focus away from the trivialities. Socrates' acceptance of death is a consent to be subjected to the laws. It is not a mere passive submission to the state which he cannot control and go against with, or a religious act that takes refuge only in a life or justice to come. Rather, it was a willful recognition of the objective character of the law and the absolute legitimate power it has over him. For Socrates, therefore, there are objective standards of justice. Such a legalistic conception of justice, however, mainly highlights a city-state's sovereign power over the life and death of individuals in the society, in the idea of absolute control that is essentially connected with this power. Such absolute power is what constitutes, in essence, political power, and the justice connected with it always only takes the form of a legalistic obedience to the laws, order, and rules of the state. As long as one follows the laws, then we may say that justice is achieved. Often, however, such conception of legal justice lacks the moral strength upon which the binding character of the law on human conscience may be established. Socrates is clear on this difference between two kinds of justice, the legal and the moral, in his insistence of the care for the true good of the soul. Plato intimates at this distinction when Socrates describes the particular strategy by which the justice that should exist in the individual is determined by comparing it with the justice that works in the state. In the Republic, this true nature is traced to the lofty standard in the idea of the just man. From the comparison with a just state, where the different classes act in accordance with their own predestined duties and responsibilities, Plato describes the just man as one in whom there is order among will, reason, and the passions. Such ordering of the soul is what Plato identifies as the justice that should exist in the individual. From the above, we can see that such ordering of the soul has to do with the inner life of the person. Here, justice is concerned not with the outward man, but with the inward, which is the true self and concernment of man. When such justice in the soul is achieved, the good person can then achieve eudaimonia, that is, the happiness which comes from the ordering of the soul. It has for its goal self-mastery, where the person is able to recognize the law as such, within him as the cause of disorder in the soul. To this extent, we can see how Socrates stands, in the words of Michel Foucault, as the master of the care of the soul, by directing attention to the interior person, Socrates reminded men that they need not concern themselves not with that they need concern themselves not with riches nor with their honor, but with themselves and with their souls. In keeping with his prophetic and philosophic revolutionary ideal, Socrates' emphasis on the soul transformed the Greek conception of the sage and the heroic ideal into a call not only for an aristocratic elite, but for all persons towards the examined ethical life. Such characterization of justice as the cause of order within the soul leads us to clearly conclude that what is more important for Socrates is the justice that lets him be a good person. True justice is therefore that which is concerned with the true good of the soul. Evidently, this justice to be fixed in the soul is never found within the realm of the state and the laws by which it orders its own affairs. This is because legal justice, at least in democratic Athens, is based on what the majority would proclaim as true and just. So that would end our lecture for today, and hope to see you in the next one. Thank you again and good day.